I'm Zach from Lagrange United Methodist Church.
Okay, and I'm Jean Ness. I'm the pastor of the Lagrange United Methodist Church.
What has been your experience with mental illness?
Okay, well, most of my experiences with mental illness had to do with my sister. Okay, and you got to keep in mind, I'm old, so this is ancient history, but I think it still happens, and so I think it's still relevant. I come from a family of 5. I had an older sister, and I was the middle daughter, and then I had a younger sister, and this is mainly about my younger sister. And when she was 14 and I was 15, we came to the realization that she had anorexia. Anorexia nervosa, for those of you who may or may not know about it, is an eating disorder where people have an unrealistic understanding of their physical body and how they are. And it's also, it's a control thing where they try to exert control over one of what they feel is a few things that they have control over, and that is how much they eat. And so they starve themselves basically to death. Susie was a gymnast, and she had a coach very casually, not inappropriately, tell her that gymnastics would be easier for her if she lost a little weight. Well, that's true. It would have been easier for her if she lost a little weight at the time when she started, but she went too far. And she was 5'3" and probably started at 140 pounds, and her lowest weight when she was in the hospital that summer was 52 pounds. We have pictures of her from the back, and she looked like a concentration camp victim. So first part of this is going to be kind of a long story, Zach, okay? Then you can ask me other questions, all right? We got her some treatment, but it was really early in the treatment for anorexia in those days. They wanted to send her to Texas. My parents didn't think that was the right thing to do. And so we got local help, and she went back to school in the fall, but always really struggled with her weight, struggled with her eating, just weird things like she lived on cans of canned green beans. I don't know. It was a way of controlling her environment. And then when she graduated, of course, she was very highly motivated, A+ student all the way through, great SAT scores, got into IU with the idea of trying to be a doctor, and did really well on her undergrad, but her weight really yo-yoed. And I don't know what the correct language is now. I'm sure somebody who had studied this more recently than I am could tell you whether anorexia changes into or how it goes, but she became bulimic. Now, bulimia is where you do eat, but then you purge that from your body, either through throwing up or through diarrhea, which is through laxatives. And that is a much more volatile weight control, and she ballooned up quite a bit. She did not get into med school. As we found out, she probably sabotaged herself. And eventually, on October 10th of 1983, she committed suicide. 1984, it was 1984. She committed suicide. Looking back on it, we could see other places where she had attempted suicide, played around with suicide. She worked in an infectious disease lab at IU, and somehow she was the only one who got seriously ill and hospitalized when this really bad virus got out, and just other things like that we could see as we look back. But she was so smart, she never let anybody really know. We started looking back after she actually committed suicide, and we'd see places where she'd be in crisis in her life, and she'd call my mom one day, and then the next day she'd call me, and the next day she'd call my sister, and another day she'd call her former gymnastics coach. And if only all 4 of us had talked, we'd realized what trouble she was in, but we didn't, because we didn't know to do that. It just sounded like, kids have trouble. When you're in college, it's emotional. You're alone. It's hard. And so, 2020 hindsight, we wish we'd have seen better. But so that's kind of what caused my journey with mental illness, because by that time I'd gotten married, and I'm married to this really nice guy who's very calm. And I can remember coming home from church about a year after Susie committed suicide and just screaming at my husband. And at that point, I called my dad, who happened to be a primary care physician, and said, I need a psychiatrist because I can't do this anymore. And so got some help for myself in how to deal with her disease, our guilt, there's a survivor's guilt too to suicide, and just dealing with suicide is complicated grief. Grieving's hard. If you lost a grandma, mom, anybody's like that, it's hard. But when it's complicated like that, it just doesn't work well. So that kind of started my journey in, mental health. It was all that had happened to her that then fed into our family as well. Do you have another question you wanted to ask?
How did your church friends help with the situation?
Well, I can tell you our pastor harmed the situation, unfortunately, because it was so early back then. In 1984, when she was first diagnosed, nobody had any idea what was going on. And he basically shamed her at the hospital and told her she was bad and wrong for doing these things to her parents and how she should, get her act together. And unfortunately, that was not helpful. Kind of the opposite of what you're supposed to do. And I don't know that I was in high school at that point. And I might not have had the best attitude towards church at that point. But I do know that I went to church every Sunday because my mom needed me there. My mom would sit in the pew and cry and cry and cry and cry. And I sat and held her hand. And I remember being put on the spot by a boyfriend who thought I was being terribly hypocritical. If I wasn't absolutely sure about God, and if I wasn't absolutely sure that I should be at church, then I shouldn't be there. And I just said, but my mom needs me there. And God works even when you do it for somebody else. God works even when you do it for the wrong reasons. I could still hear the messages. I still was absorbing the love and the prayers. And I really think God honored me for being there for my mom. I don't know if God honored me so much as blessed me by this need and this desire that I had when I went to college then to stay close to God, because that then kept me close to God, so that when Susie actually committed suicide, I had a relationship with the church and with a group of people who were there for me and who loved me and walked with me through that. I had a relationship with a pastor who could mentor me through that. And then, I said a minute ago, you often don't see these things until you look back on them. When I went to seminary, one of the exercises that they have you do is they have you, make a timeline. You guys have probably done this in school for various things, where you put like your birth date and how old you are, and then you go through and you put what are the various things that are happening in the world during your life, and then how old were you when you first said yes to Jesus, and what are the things that were especially blessing to you, and you put those on the timeline, and then what are the things that were especially hard for you. And the thing that I found out when I did that timeline that I had never put together before was that there are various things that happened in my life. Susie's illness and diagnosis, her suicide, some other things that happened in our lives. And as I did that timeline, before each one of those, I had some sort of an event that took place in my life that brought me closer to God. So it was like God was saying, okay, you're going to need this faith inoculation, so to speak, for what's coming. Now, I'm not saying that God caused any of this. I don't believe God caused any of this, but God could see it coming. And so God gave me the gift of closeness, of grace, of love, of hope ahead of the crisis, so that when I got to the crisis, I had some people call it their spiritual tank filled up, so that I could cope in a way that was healthy and God honoring. Sometimes more healthy than others. Let's go there.
What did you wish someone had told you that you want to make sure you tell youth today?
Okay. It wasn't until I went to seminary that I realized that as soon as we figured out what was going on with Susie, we should have had all of us in therapy. Because there's a thing called family systems. Ever read Edward Friedman's and all that? Families have predictable patterns when they get in crisis. And you can kind of predict how it's going to go, but you can also help people with how it's going to go, because unfortunately those patterns that began way back when I was 16 have continued to now when I'm 63. Those patterns, you take on roles when a family is in crisis, and one of the roles is the family savior, kind of, the doer, the coper, and that's me. I'm the one who keeps it all together. I keep the trains running on time. I make sure that everything happens. Unfortunately, what that means for my older sister is she became what they call the lost child. She didn't feel like she had a part in things. She didn't feel like she could affect change. Even not long ago, we were out and she said, every place in the world that I am, except for in our family, people look at me as capable and strong and valuable. And in our family, I'm still the goof up. And I just thought, my gosh, we are 60 some years old and we should have had help from the very beginning. But we didn't know that at that time. You can't do what you don't know, And I don't blame my folks for any of this, because they did their absolute level best,